You're watching a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall. Our program will return after this message. What does Chip Roy think about Jim Baird's yes vote for Biden's $1.2 trillion spending bill?
Any Republican who votes for this bill should be ashamed of themselves.
Jim Baird should be ashamed, and we should be disgusted.
This budget funds full-term abortion. It funds DEI. It funds trans ideology on our youth as young as 12 years old.
But at least Baird voted to protect the border, right?
If you care about the border, you're getting nothing here.
On May 7th, vote no to big government Jim Baird.
I'm Charles Bookwalter, and I approve this message.
Jim Baird recently claimed the Bookwalter for Congress grassroots campaign to unseat Baird is a political weapon of the swamp and that Charles Bookwalter is a rhino. Really? Well, let's just see who really owns who. On the left are the top donors of the Jim Baird campaign. On the right, we have the top donors of the Bookwalter campaign. What do you notice? Baird is right. Charles Bookwalter is owned by the people of the 4th District. And who owns Jim Baird? The swamp. The swamp owns Jim Baird.
I'm Charles Bookwalter, and I approve this message.
We now return you to a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall.
Hello, Greencastle, Putnam County, and the surrounding areas. My name is Vince Aguirre, and while I'm involved in a lot of different things in our community, today the hat I'm wearing is a Greencastle resident interested in learning more about political candidates. Today I have with me Charles Bookwalter, who's running in the Republican primary for the Indiana 4th Congressional District to represent our district in the U.S. Congress. Charles, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here, a pleasure.
I think it's really important for people to see all the candidates and for all the candidates to have a platform. I've invited every candidate in this race on both sides. You're the third interview I've done. I think it's really important. I'm not here to question your ideas or debate you. I'm here to learn your perspective and allow other people to learn them. And we may agree on some things, we may not, but my goal is to not express any.
Oh man, I was going to look for body language and see, that hurt a little bit.
I'm human. I'll try. But I think as you and we met briefly last summer, had a very short opportunity to talk, and I've appreciated talking to you as a person and excited to learn more about you as a candidate.
Well, thanks for giving me this platform to meet people of Putnam County.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And what are we, 5 days out from early voting? 6 days out from the time we're recording this?
Which is a whole other issue. We should talk about that too.
How
that benefits incumbents.
I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah.
So why don't we get started by a little background about you and your life as far back as you're willing to go. We'll get to the politics at some point, but I want to learn more about you as a person and your life experiences.
Okay. So I grew up in Vermilion County, Indiana, which is about 35 to 40 minutes north of here, a little northwest, right on the border of Illinois. Typical Hoosier upbringing, played sports and enjoyed life. And I lived with my parents who are still both alive and married and very supportive of all their children. I have 2 brothers and a sister. We all still live here in Indiana. I graduated from North Vermilion High School, and I ended up going to Indiana University, and I graduated from Indiana University. I should say that I was an all-state football player at North Vermilion High School, which got me a scholarship to play at St. Joe College in Rensselaer, Indiana. I bring that up because that's also in the district in Jasper County. And I did 1 year there and realized that wasn't the experience I was looking for. And college football is way different than high school football, even in a smaller school like that. It's so different. I ended up graduating from Indiana University. That required me to do an internship, which I did at the Pentagon in 2000. I was in the Indiana National Guard at that time. That 9/11 was very impactful in my life. I worked in the E-ring that got hit by the airplane or torpedo, depending on the conspiracy theory of what hit the Pentagon. But if it was hit by an airplane, it was the airplane. And the public affairs office was actually hit. So I knew people that were in there. So it was very concerning to me. That shaped my life, made me want to go serve. In 2006, after doing a few years working in sales, after graduating from Indiana University, I was able to get into the Army Special Forces in a direct pipeline where I went in as an enlisted guy. It took me 3 years to earn the Green Beret because I was a medic, which took a year, and I had Chinese as a language, which was 6 months. So it's a year and a half of that training. In 2009, I graduated from the Army Special Forces School, went out to Fort Lewis, Washington with 1st Special Forces Group as a medic, and I immediately deployed to Afghanistan. That was one deployment. Returned home, did a bunch of schools, then deployed again to Philippines. And then in a 2012 timeframe, my wife was like, hey, this is a lot. We've been doing this nonstop for a number of years. And I never intended to make the military a career.
Mm-hmm.
So we came back home, moved back to Indianapolis, and I leveraged that job that I had as a medic in the military, in the Special Forces, into medical device sales, which ultimately landed a job with Intuitive Surgical, which is the manufacturer of the Da Vinci robot. So my job from whatever years those were, 2014, when I relocated to Boone County, to 2021, was in the operating room, working with surgeons on how to use the Da Vinci robot, how to convert surgeons from laparoscopic surgery to robotic surgery, work with every single level of the hospital on acquiring a robot and using robot and implementing robotics into your hospital. That's a great job. It gave me the financial opportunity to invest in some commercial real estate, which I did in Clinton County, Indiana, and I purchased a Jimmy John's fast casual restaurant as the anchor store. I say all that to tell you because when COVID occurred, that's like the two worst places that you could be. In healthcare, in the operating room, as your primary means of income, and owning a fast casual restaurant, commercial real estate, where they're trying to lock everything down. So COVID completely flipped my life, like many people, turned my life upside down. And that's what got me involved into politics. I ultimately resigned my job and my career because I didn't want to get jabbed. I was 42 or something at the time, 45, and I was healthy and I was looking at it and I know medicine and I'm like, hey, this isn't for me. This isn't, just the things that I look at aren't adding up for me. I was in the operating room. I saw what was the reality of what was going on in these operating rooms. And here's an anecdotal story. People always like, hospitals were overwhelmed, all that. That wasn't true. They weren't overwhelmed because COVID patients come in. They were overwhelmed because of the policies that were enacted due to COVID. So nurses that cared about medicine and about their job, they stayed there and worked. Nurses that didn't care were the same ones that came in, because a lot of people don't remember this. If you walked by somebody in the street that had a dog that had symptoms of COVID, you could take 10 days off of paid vacation. Do you remember that?
I don't, but
Yeah.
I'll take your word.
Yeah. So I was in the operating rooms and these nurses were overworked and stressed out because the hospital policy was that if you were 100 feet from a cousin that had a runny nose, then you could go to someone, because all the fear, remember the fear of COVID, that you could go to a
I
nurse.
do remember contact tracing and family events.
That's it.
Yeah.
And then you got 10 days off. So that's why hospitals were overwhelmed, is because so many people were taking advantage of the overreaction to COVID. Same thing happened in my Jimmy John's. People would quit, or they would just say, I'm not coming to work today. And they would leverage against me. Like, what do you mean you can't come? I got no one coming to work. I need you to come to work. Oh, I might have COVID. Do you want everyone in Frankfurt to know that COVID is going through our store? I'm like, So they would use it against employers. People wouldn't show up to work. They would say, I need 10 days off. And they would just go home for 10 days and then show up like, I'm ready to work again. Very difficult time. And so that is really what kind of got me involved in politics, as I looked around wondering what is going on. We live in a Republican state with a Republican supermajority, and our Republicans are locking us down. Our Republicans are making mandates with misdemeanors attached to them, which Governor Holcomb did. No Republican is standing up for us. My congressman should be in front of businesses' doors saying, you cannot shut these people down. You do not have to comply with these mandates. That's just a mandate. It's not law. Do not comply. And if I was representative, that's what I would have been saying. Do not comply. Because I lived it in my own life. I stood up against the mandates. I resigned my job, my career. When the health department called me and complained that because I wasn't masking my employees, I told them, I don't care what they say. I am not going to mask my employees. I'm not going to separate my chairs. I'm not going to put the stickers down. If you don't want to come in here because you feel unsafe, then don't go to Jimmy John's. Use the drive-through. If you don't like our policies, then go eat at Arnie's or another sandwich shop, because I was assessing what was around me, and what I was assessing was not the narrative that was coming out of the official narrative coming out of both the parties, the uniparty system. So that's where I am. That's why I am right here. So that's my background of my life. I did about 10 years in the Army Special Forces, 2 combat deployments. I earned a Bronze Star for meritorious service, and just did a lot of trainings and schools and stuff like that.
Yeah. Thank you for your service. Appreciate that. Do you speak any Chinese? Is that
not anymore?
Okay.
It
I'm sure
was
that's hard
enough
to
to
stay
get by.
fresh.
Right? Yeah. It's a perishable skill. Even like Spanish, which
Yeah.
I have learned pretty well. It's a perishable skill and requires a lot of.
Probably a little easier to speak Spanish around
Yeah,
here
of
these
course.
days.
Yeah.
I took Japanese in college, and within a year I didn't have anyone to talk
Yeah.
to, so I don't remember any Japanese.
That's right.
So I can
And the
relate.
etymology of Spanish being Latin and some Germanic, you can always hear a little bit of it. You never hear Mandarin.
Yeah, never.
Yeah.
Never. That's fair. That's fair. Clearly, your life's taking you on this journey, and these experiences have made you passionate to run. When was the moment you knew you had to run for Congress?
I appreciate the question. It allows me to talk a little bit about my faith. I can only say that it was like the same anguishing and painful prayer that Jacob had before he had the name change into Israel. It was just a lot of prayer. It was like a lot of introspection and prayer. Lord, is this what you want me to do in my life? Not my will be done, but your will be done. I had always been interested in politics. At Indiana University, my degree was in political science and legal studies. A student of history. I never watched TV. My parents didn't raise us on TV. We couldn't watch TV during the week. So I have a vast library at home. I've always collected books and read books. It's what my family would do in our off times. Very familiar with history, philosophy, political philosophy, economic philosophy, theology. And so it's always interested me. And so again, when my life was turned upside down, knowing what our system of government was set up to be versus what we have now, and being a guy that raised my hand and said, I will protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, I take that seriously. I take that oath very seriously. I take the Constitution very seriously. I take my faith very seriously. And after COVID, when I'm looking around and seeing what a cataclysmic failure it was, that's when these prayers started. That's when this asking God, is this what you want me to do with my life? Should I focus on this? Should I get involved and engaged in politics? Is where the answer became clear to me. But it really was just because I was looking around and noticed or thought to myself, knowing history, knowing human history, histories of governments, of where there's always an empire that falls and a revolution that occurs, and this cycle that continues to happen throughout human history. I thought, man, this was an opportunity for our conservative elected representatives, not just in America, but in Indiana, to go down in history of some of the greatest defenders of liberty and prosperity and individual rights that we've ever had in our lifetime. If we could have watched that happen, they would have gone down in history books, been written about as the people that stood up when the people needed them. And now, as you see the after effects of COVID, now that we look back on it in hindsight, you look back, well, yeah, the few people now that are held up are the people that stood. Joe Rogan, for example, who stood up a little bit against it, or Jordan Peterson, or Malone, Dr. Malone, or McCullough. Some of these people that actually had a spine that stood up against, they're the people that we revere now. And our politicians failed us, which only goes to show that they're not, a lot of them, most of them, are not philosophically sound. They're not in it because they believe in the Constitution or limited government or the things that are so important that Hoosiers believe in, these values that we believe in it. It's self-aggrandizement. It's self-dealing. It is how to promote themselves, their friends, the party over the people, the philosophy and the ideas that are so important to Americans from our founding to where we are.
You're watching a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall. Our program will return after this message. Who is Charles Bookwalter? Charles is a husband, father, entrepreneur, and former Green Beret. But most importantly, Charles Bookwalter is a constitutional conservative. Charles Bookwalter will work to close our borders, ensuring the safety and security of our nation. Charles will fight to secure your personal medical freedoms, giving you complete control over your own healthcare decisions. And Charles Bookwalter will continue his fight to secure our elections, ensuring every vote counts. On May 7th, you have a choice.
I'm Charles Bookwalter, and I approve this message.
Why did Jim Baird suddenly flip-flop on his support for Ukraine funding? One day he's for it, the next he's not. For the record, between 2022 and 2023, Jim Baird voted on 3 separate occasions to give a total of $90 billion to the Ukrainian war machine. He even received an A rating for his unwavering support. But now Baird says he's against funding Ukraine. What changed? Charles Bookwalter. Charles Bookwalter is a true constitutional conservative who's ready to serve and vote the will of the people of the Fourth. That's what changed.
I'm Charles Bookwalter, and I approve this message.
We now return you to a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall.
That's fair. That's fair. So really, on top of those life experiences and your oath to the Constitution, feels like to me that COVID was really the driving point for you to enough is enough, and that's when you decided.
Yeah, because they all failed us.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
They all fail. Even parties in politics, so even like libertarians that talk about limited government, laissez-faire, they failed too. They were horrible across the board. So it takes people that truly believe in these fundamental principles of limited government, of transparency, of the 10th Amendment, of laissez-faire markets and free markets. None of these systems are perfect, but this is the best system that we have for the most people, and that America is so far from. And when I go out knocking on doors and talking to people, they all agree. They all say the same thing. We have lost control of our country. It's the biggest problem with America right now, and the long-term problem, or the long-term greatest threat to the nation is apathy. Apathy in a system that requires people to be involved in our government to make it work the way it's supposed to work. And as soon as we give up all those rights and responsibilities, or government usurps them, which has happened, they create a managerial class of people, a ruling class of people that only get involved so that they can have power and influence and money and rule over the rest of us. And our government was never set up to be that way. It's the best system that protects the most amount of people. And we're so far from that. It is very concerning. And if you look around, you can see the unraveling of America occurring. America looks nothing like the America that you grew up in or that I grew up in. And I don't think it's better off. I think it's worse off. And we need to do something about it.
So I'm really curious, you and I have spoken before the recording about, in recent history, the Republican primary for this seat is the decision maker. I don't know the last time there was a Democrat in this seat, maybe 30 years ago, I'm not sure. Assuming the early voting starts in a couple days and we get past that day, and assuming in November you are our congressman, you sound really passionate about how do you want to differ from other politicians, not just our congressman, but anyone, in really giving the power to the people.
Okay, thank you for that question.
Yeah,
that's a good one. It's just phrased a little bit differently than sometimes the little other questions I get. What would be my legislative agenda, or what would be the first thing I do, or things like that. This is phrased a little bit differently and allows you to focus on what would it look like if Charles Bookwalter were a congressman. I often say that I don't have a legislative agenda. We need representatives, not legislators. This is the U.S. House of Representatives, not the U.S. House of Legislators. And unfortunately, where we are today, in the system where we are today, that's what we get so much of. We get so much of politicians saying, I'm running so that I can do, they have their own agenda. There's something important to them in their life that they want to get into power so they can make a law to help out whatever part of their life or whatever it is. And I think that's a wrong way of looking at this. We need to represent our districts to Washington, D.C., not go to Washington, D.C., get corrupted by all the lobbyists, the money, the power, and the influence that occurs, and then come back to the district and represent Washington, D.C. to the district. And that's what happens. That's what's happening across the board in America and in Indiana, where there's issues that are so important to Hoosiers in the 4th Congressional District: election integrity, medical liberty, carbon sequestration and Green New Deal energy policies. All these things that Hoosiers don't want and don't like in our district, but are being forced on us by policies that occur in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. takes our money. They create all this infrastructure and agencies and administrative authority and bureaucracies. And then politicians get elected and they go there and they try to bring all that money back to their district. And it comes with strings attached. And one of the greatest examples is what Congressman Baird has sponsored, the primary sponsor of the House Resolution 4824, which is the Carbon Sequestration Collaboration Act, which gives more money and more authority to the Department of Energy of researching terrestrial carbon sequestration, pulling CO2 out of the air and building a 3,000-foot pipeline underneath, 3,000 feet underground, and pumping this toxic sludge through our aquifers, through everything underground to store CO2. It's anti-God, it's just anti-natural. It's just like the craziest energy scheme that I've ever seen. And we have Indiana Republicans that go to DC, they vote against the Inflation Reduction Act that makes this all possible. And then when it passes by Democrats, they bring that money to Indiana through these new policies like Baird is primary sponsor, the Carbon Sequestration Collaboration Act. It's just to get access to this money. So, yeah, I think we need more representation, less legislation. And we also need to have representatives that don't live in D.C., that don't become socialites in D.C., but stay within their district. That's something I've also promised to the people of my district. I will not relocate to Washington, D.C. I will come back. I am going to be costly in that regard. I am going to spend the money in that regard, flying back and forth or driving back and forth to Washington, D.C. But I intend to be here. I intend to be among the people and do the bidding and the will of the people. Right now, Vince, I've done 50 town halls at least. I do town halls all over the district and take questions across the gamut. Whatever question, I'll answer that question. And I do a live town hall. I've committed that if we win, I will continue to do those live town halls from Washington, D.C. They probably won't be every Thursday, but they would be 1 or 2 times a month where I can stay connected to the people of the district, take their questions, answer their questions, and stay close to the people. Now, my opponent, the incumbent, the congressman, isn't going to do this interview. There's debates that are set up. He's not going to show up for the debate. There's forums set up. They're not going to. That's what the incumbent should be doing. That's the farthest thing from staying from the people. These incumbents and representatives now say, you want to get in touch with me? Call my D.C. office. Have you ever called the D.C. office? You know what the process is. Either they don't answer or you get some intern, 18 years old, you never get a response. You know that you don't feel like your question is getting addressed. We would do that completely different. We would bring that office back to the people. We would have 3 or 4 offices here. We would still hold town halls. We would go to these offices and we'd meet people on a regular basis. And I know that's a tough schedule to keep and it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort. That's why you need young, energetic, concerned and dedicated people in these offices. Recently saw an article, and I think it was by Ron Paul, that talked about this, about the idea, the fact that there's so many septuagenarians and octogenarians in Washington, D.C. for the first time in the history of government. It's never been that way. Madison wrote the Constitution when he was 23, I think. Yeah. And in the history of mankind, it's always been. And the older they go in, and the younger come in. And in this epoch in our time, we're being ruled by a class of people that have accumulated so much wealth and power. It's never been seen before in the history of mankind. And we're seeing it right now in the United States. So far from our founding.
I spoke with another candidate in one of these interviews and shared an anecdotal story of what I'm seeing anecdotally is the people I talk to out in our community. I don't know about the whole 4th congressional district, but the older they are, the more they want younger people, which is counterintuitive to what I would assume. I would expect someone older would think they're more experienced and want someone older and more experienced. But the older people I speak to, retirement age and above, want younger people. And I find that a really interesting dynamic.
I've heard the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm almost reluctant sometimes to say, they're like, who's a congressman? I tell them. And I'll tell him this is his 4th term. He'll be 80 years old, and they're like 80 years old. And it happened yesterday when I was outdoor knocking, and the guy's like, "I'm 78." I'm like, "Would you run for Congress?" Like, no way would I do that. Yeah. So I found the same thing, and I was reluctant to bring it up to older people, but I find the same thing that they're like, "Oh, we need younger people."
Yeah. What you're a very smart guy who's thinking a lot about this. You've been running a campaign for a very long time. When you think about that day after the election, and kind of obviously if you're a candidate, you always expect to win. You don't run without expecting to win. Do you think much about what those first days in DC will be like? And if so, what concerns do you have, if any?
I do think about it a little bit, not a lot. So first of all, it's very difficult to beat an incumbent.
Yeah.
And I'm very aware of that. And oftentimes I say, if we win, and people are like, hey, when we win, be optimistic. I'm optimistic.
Sure.
If there is a campaign that's going to beat an incumbent, it looks like ours. We've knocked on 25,000 doors.
Wow.
We've passed out almost 50,000 pieces of literature. We have a great digital presence, doing town halls all over, and we have a lot of support for having never run an election before. So I don't let my mind go there that often about what it would look like. It's similar in Ranger School. When you go to Ranger School or an SF, you never buy the long tab that says Special Forces. You never buy the tab that says Ranger until you graduate. It's like almost like it's bad. You don't even think about that.
Sure.
Similarly in the military, I use this analogy a lot. When you're at the range, you got a 50-meter target, 100-meter target, 300-meter target. You focus on that 50.
Yeah.
And then when you clear the 50, then you work on the 100 and so on and so forth. So I'm always trying to make sure I'm focusing on the 25-meter target, which is the goal at hand, and then always looking at the 300-meter, but really focusing on these targets. And that 300-meter target is the election you referred to. And what would it look like? I would immediately, again, being a freshman, I would immediately reach out to the people that I align with. That would be the House Freedom Caucus right now. That would be Congressman Good or Congressman Eli Crane, who I've got a little bit of a relationship with, who is in the Freedom Caucus, House Freedom Caucus. And I would say, how can I work with you and help you? And it aligns with what I was saying about being a representative, not a legislator. I don't intend, Vince, to go there and spend 8 hours a day trying to come up with legislation and rethink the wheel, or reinvent the wheel, or whatever. I would go work with people that are already there working on these very important issues and fighting these important fights. Like Thomas Massey, for example, who always implements or tries to pass or promotes bill defunding the Department of Education. That's a top priority for me. I think the federal government should be completely out of education. That money should be given back to parents and people, where we are more invested in our state. We have more control over education in our state and our local communities, right? The federal government gets all that money, they wash it, they give it back with strings attached, pennies on the dollar, as this bureaucracy in DC grows and grows and grows. So I would go out there and go work with people using my skill set and my ability to work hard to help further these bills that need to be addressed right now. Another one would be the legal immunity that vaccine manufacturers have, that no other industry has. And now if it requires a law, but getting that out of the National Childhood Immunization Act, or somehow striking that, but we need to work on that. Pharma companies need to get rid of that liability, that legal immunity that they have. And so that's what it would look like. It would be reaching out to those people. And then you said, what concerns do I have? The concerns are the booby traps that are set in Washington, D.C. For people that go there.
Sure.
And we all know about it because representatives have already talked about it. I've talked to congressmen, they say that such and such said all these things when they ran, and then they got elected and they came out here, and as soon as the lobbyists got a hold of them, as soon as the leadership got a hold of them, they changed their tune. We can't allow that to happen. And that is the biggest, that's something that concerns what I pray a lot about, is maintaining that humility, being humble, and a reachable person in that position, because it's a very important position and a high level position. But doing what I've talked about is the most difficult thing to do, the most difficult thing about that job, which is having a spine, which is being able to stand up to leadership and not do things just because they say we need to pass this, because we need these billions of dollars to go to Ukraine or whatever. You have to be able to say no, and then you have to be able to come back to your constituency and say, everyone, the reason I did this is why you elected me. This is what you wanted, and I'm delivering on it. And it's very difficult, all that pressure that I'm receiving. So those are a few of the concerns I have, is being honest about the reality of the situation out there, which is corrupt and is a massive power, influence, and wealth that human beings have to protect themselves against when they go out there and be a part of that system.
Yeah.
You're watching a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall. Our program will return after this message.
My name is Charles Bookwalter, and I'm running for U.S. Congress. In the average campaign commercial, the announcer, backed by patriotic music, would inform you I'm a former Green Beret and Bronze Star recipient. Or you'd be told how my opponent, Jim Baird, voted to send billions to Ukraine, or that he authored the bill to bring carbon sequestration plants and Joe Biden's Green New Deal to Indiana. But this isn't that kind of ad. I just want to let you know, for the first time in 6 years, you have a choice in the Republican primary. I'm Charles Bookwalter, and I humbly ask for your vote on May 7th. I'm Charles Bookwalter, and I approve this message.
This is Jim Baird. Jim Baird claims to be a conservative, claims to have the same exact values you have, then turns around and votes in favor of Joe Biden's bloated $1.2 trillion spending bill. Here's what's in it.
This budget funds full-term abortion. It funds DEI. It funds trans ideology on our youth as young as 12 years old.
For the first time in 6 years, the 4th District has a choice in who we send to Washington, D.C. On May 7th, vote for true conservative leadership. Charles Bookwalter.
I'm Charles Bookwalter, and I approve this message.
We now return you to a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall.
Has anything, as you're door knocking, and that's an impressive amount of doors, although you haven't knocked on my door yet, so I feel a little left out.
We don't have a huge presence in Putnam County, and we're gonna have to shift.
We don't have to get into it, but I know the Republican Indiana primary system is something that you may not be a fan of.
For the reason you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate? I don't want to go there if you don't want to go there. But
Anderson v. Celebres, which is the flagship case on this, the Supreme Court case, says that issues are so important and they change so quickly. And a political candidate, is a rallying point for these issues that are so important to people that can be changed on a dime. And COVID proved that. There's issues like vaccine mandates that are one issue. There's issues like right now, the Stop the Water Steal up. And it's another good example in Boone County and Tippecanoe County, where people are going to come out and they're probably going to vote on that single issue, that one thing. And people will switch parties because of that one issue. And now we've said in Indiana, can't do that. You cannot even switch parties. So that means if the Republican Party said that we believe in conscription again, and we are going to conscript all men 18 and send them over to Ukraine to die because everyone's dying over there. As a combat veteran that is not in support of these wars and interventions all over, I call myself an anti-war candidate. That might make me rethink my affiliation with the Republican Party, right? That's an issue that can be. Abortion is a single issue. But in Indiana now, you can't choose. So you are in jeopardy now, and the Democrats aren't as strict on this, but you're in jeopardy now if someone looks back and says you got a Republican vote because it was an important vote on that issue and you had to come over and vote in the Republican Party for that because it was such an important issue and you aligned with that, and then something changes 2 years later, you can't run now as a Democrat or as a Republican because you have two. So there's now essentially a 6-year waiting, or in that case it would be 4-year for you to get involved, engage, and run for office, even as a precinct committeeman. And now they're trying to get it changed to school board member. So there is no office that you can run for or have any impact in unless you have voted in 2 primaries with that party consecutively. They have to be consecutive votes. They could be spread out, but they have to be consecutive. And I think that's horrifying. That is completely wrong. If Hoosiers were serious about fixing this issue, you close the primary. That's what you do. It's a pretty simple fix. A lot of states have done it. You close the primary. You have to register a year in advance so people can't go back and forth voting in different primaries.
Is that your preference rather than the California primary where everyone's on one ballot and top
I'd have to look at it.
And I don't really know where I stand on that, but
I don't know either.
I just learned recently about their primary system, and basically all candidates from all parties are on there. And if it was a head-to-head matchup, the top 2 primary winners go head-to-head.
Yeah. Now that I've studied this so much, I've read all the I've read all the briefs. I've been in all the cases, most of them, myself and John Rust's case. I understand that there's some value in having the party have some protection within the party.
Right.
And so in California, you would just have all the same people choosing the 2 candidates for both parties. That concerns me a little bit too.
Sure.
So you could have one leftist saying, I want we already talked about how the Republican Party is full of conservatives and liberals. So one leftist in California could choose the most leftist Democrat and the most leftist Republican and shift the Overton window. Yeah.
That's fair.
I like the idea of closed primaries where you can't, that's party rating. That's the idea of party rating. And the Republican Party said they don't want party rating. That's fine. But the 2 primary rule doesn't solve that.
Sure.
Closing primaries solves party rating.
I want to go a step back. And I was mentioning you're knocking on all these doors, you're hearing from people. I assume even within just Republican primary voters' doors, you're still getting a variety of perspectives. Has anything surprised you that you've heard while talking to people in the...
No, not really. No. The biggest issues are the border, inflation, and green energy policies is really big. The most recent one, now that we're knocking on doors, and Congressman Baird has voted for that minibus bill, which is terribly offensive, all this stuff in that bill, and I usually carry around that bill. Democrats are happy with that bill, if that tells you anything. Okay. It's a big win for Democrats with that bill. A lot of social spending in that bill. That's a big one for people now. As we talked, did you know Congressman Baird voted for the $1.2 trillion minibus bill? Oh, geez, not again. So that's a big concern. Any surprises? No, not really. Okay. A lot of people, one of their first questions is, where do you stand on Donald Trump?
I can see that.
Yeah, he is a very divisive political candidate. And I think that's because of the narrative that's gone on around him by his haters. I just tell them 2 things. My candidacy is not about President Trump. It's about representing the people of the 4th Congressional District, first of all. And second of all, Donald Trump is going to be our nominee, and I'm going to support him. So you should too, right? Like, you can't hang your whole hat on and not support a Republican like me because you don't like Donald Trump. And frankly, I don't know that much about Donald J. Trump. There's so much psychological warfare that's going on about him and about that guy, about things that he said, which they've edited to change and make it seem it's one thing and it's really not. So I'm not sure. All I know is it doesn't matter if it's Donald Trump or if it's Joe Biden or if it's anybody else. They need a strong Congress and strong congressmen in there that aren't just yes men for the party at that point. There were times during COVID when we needed a strong Republican Congress to say no to President Trump about some things. The CARES Act, the stimulus bills, the vaccine, those were all things where we needed strong conservative congressmen to speak up against it. We don't have very many doing that. And we need more, particularly from districts like ours.
Do you see anything, if Joe Biden's president and you are the congressman, anything you can align on, can work together on? Is there anything, I told you earlier, I'm a political optimist. I like to think that outside of all the negativity and psychological warfare and the evil things happening in politics, there's some good stuff in there where we can be human and see eye to eye. Is there anything you think, I know it's putting you on the spot, and not my intention, but
unfortunately, I don't. And the only reason is because I feel that the Democrat Party now is just full of socialist Democrats. And after Obama, the few things that Democrats were good on, they've now failed on. Like war is a big one. Remember Code Pink?
Remind me.
Code Pink was anti-war Democrats that were against George Bush. They would protest against George Bush. And after 2012, when I got out of war, when I had my experiences in war, and I started rethinking my positions on war and interventionism abroad, I started looking at the Democrat Party and how Code Pink was anti-war until Obama got elected, and then he just continued bombing people all over. And how it's this tribalism is, look, we don't want war when George Bush is president. When Obama's president, you can bomb whoever you want. Oh, guys, that's a problem. And so the Democrats, where I think that I would align with them on perhaps something like war, they're gone too. Now, every politician at the Uniparty is fully on board with wars abroad all the time, forever wars, intervening all over the place at all times. And right now, NATO forces have been reported that they're in Ukraine now. NATO, Germany, France, NATO forces. That means, and already special operations forces are in Ukraine, U.S. military special operations forces, but that means more potentially having American men and women on the ground in Ukraine, and it should be very frightening to everybody, or troops on the ground in Iran or whatever. Democrats used to be good on that bill, on that issue, and they're not. And I don't even know where Democrats stand on things like, here's another one, because I get asked this a lot, and I don't mind talking about controversial issues. But I think, for example, cannabis should be recreational, right? I don't think it should be illegal for that. I think it should be studied. Indiana tried to legalize hemp, and I knew farmers that were in my area that were growing hemp, my neighbors who were growing hemp. They were telling me about all these opportunities you could have, hemp, concrete. I'm like, wow, you can do so many things with this. That failed. We don't have that in Indiana when they tried to push it. All that crop, it went to feed animals, or it was destroyed because all the regulation didn't allow to keep up with processing all that. And there's so much could be studied with cannabis for health issues. I know children are being treated with seizures and all this. I don't know where Democrats stand, because Democrats now are like, we need to legalize it and tax it. Like, that is just, I would never support legalizing cannabis and taxing it. They already have all of our money. They already have too much of our money that they weaponize against us. You legalize cannabis, you give the state of Indiana $1 billion. They're not going to cut taxes. They're not going to cut the income tax. They're not going to cut the property tax. They're going to take that money and they're going to put cameras on street signs. They're going to give license plate readers to all the police officers. They're going to build the network that they use to oppress us. So I would not support that issue. And Democrats are wrong on that issue too. Instead of having, that's why I've said that the reason that I have the positions that I have, is because I think Christian, conservative, constitutionalist positions allow for the umbrella for everyone that wants to live their life under it. And Democrats and mainstream Republicans, and I'm speaking broadly, and I probably shouldn't speak so broad. Not all Democrats and not all Republicans, but typically the narrative is that you have to do this our way for the common good of all, or it's not going to work. And I think that's wrong. It's completely wrong. It's not for the good of all people. But in a system that would be like we used to have, like the founding of the nation. The founding of the nation, which was arguably more Christian, more conservative, and more closely aligned with the Constitution, allowed for this great system, this great petri dish of government that we had, where anyone could come in and they could look, and they could make a living, create wealth, become anything that you wanted to be. That's because it was free to do that. It's no longer free to do that. There's so many restrictions, so many regulations, so many requirements. We had cannabis back when they founded they were growing hemp. George Washington was growing hemp. We had alcohol, tobacco, and firearms during the founding of the nation. There's no ATF in the Constitution. We had all these vices and things. And our Christian, constitutional, conservative forefathers never thought that it was for them to legislate this morality. They said that we have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and property, and government is established only to protect those. That's it. Just to protect them and let people live freely. And I think that is a much better system that provided much better opportunities to get out of poverty and to create a system that we have of freedom and wealth and prosperity, which I see unraveling around us right now because of the managerial class. It's so far away from our founding principles, and they call themselves Republicans and conservatives.
Yeah.
You're watching a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall. Our program will return after this message. Here's what the people of the Fourth are saying about Charles Bookwalter.
Hadn't heard of this guy before, and Charles, and I thought I'm always interested in trying to find a new conservative candidate to support and get more involved in politics. We have to stand up. The men have to stand up. Where are the men in the country to stand up for this? We have to be the watchmen on the walls. We need to close the border immediately. Nobody comes across. I mean, we've got open places where they can come across.
If you live in Indiana's 4th Congressional District, you have a choice for Congress this primary. Charles Bookwalter. Visit bookwalterforcongress.com to learn more.
I'm Charles Bookwalter, and I approve this message.
We now return you to a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall.
We talked earlier about kind of the political spectrum and how there are so many different places you can land on that, right? And the single issues can bring people to one side where they may not agree with most things on that side, but that issue is the most important thing for them, where it's complex being a human and caring about politics.
Yeah, that's right. It is complex. And that's why humans need to really be mindful and stop themselves from thinking that if we only had a little bit more authority, a little bit more power, and a little bit more of your money, that we could solve all your issues. We can't. We're fallen. We are sinners, we're fallen, and we can't do that. And that's why the message of the founders was so important, that we have this system set up so that the government cannot infringe on these things. That's it. Anything else gets pushed back to the state. And you determine these things in your communities, in your states, and in your local authority. And churches help. There were so many. When Alexis de Tocqueville wrote Democracy in America, when he went around in the America and wrote about it, he was so amazed that there was so many associations. There was so much engagement. That was a big part of his book. He talked about how there's so many associations that people come together and have all these guilds and associations, and they work for the benefit of it, and it's no government involvement. That was there's a major point of democracy in America. And look how far we've fallen. Like, the government has usurped all these roles and responsibilities. They've taken all of our money, 55 cents out of every dollar. And now we are apathetic. Well, what do you want? I'm already giving the government all my money. It's their decision now. They make it. It's supposed to be our decisions. It's supposed to be us debating these things at the local level and at state levels and at community levels, and having our churches help and the local groups come together, associations. And we don't have that. And it's led to an incredible amount of apathy, where only 4, 8, 10% of people even come out and vote in a primary.
Slow.
Yeah. And it's my estimation that if we had major voter turnout in the primary in Indiana, conservatives like me would win in landslides. I think most people, normal people, common people, agree on so many things. It's just that we don't go out and vote. We're too busy focusing on our family, on our work, or whatever, trying to work hard to pay our taxes and take care of our family and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, my perfect world is, even if the people I'm supporting are not winning elections, as long as turnout's huge, I think that's really important. And that's one of the reasons for doing these videos, have people get a chance to know. I've been surprised by how many people, when I tell them what I'm doing, oh, there's an election coming up?
Yeah.
Oh, early voting starts next week? Oh, there's 5 candidates between the 2 parties? Like, it's interesting to me that people don't know that. And regardless of who a certain person may support or may not support, I want everyone to voice their opinion. I want people to get out there and take advantage of democracy. It's really important to me.
Yeah.
Sorry to go on my grandstand.
No, we share that common thing, and I want to, for the listeners and people learning about my campaign for the first time, you asked what would it look like, how to become close to the people if I were to win. This is such a big part of our campaign, and it's something we've been doing for the last few years. Green Berets in other parts of the world, we do what's called advise and assist. We recruit, train, and fight alongside our allies. That's what we did in Afghanistan and the Philippines. We recruit people that want to throw off the regime. We train them how to shoot, move, communicate, and then we lead them in combat. Well, we've implemented the same thing in Boone County and in the 4th Congressional District for the last few years, recruiting people to get engaged in the process by running for precinct committeeman or delegate or county council, or commissioner, or whatever. We train them by providing constitutional classes like Constitution Alive or precinct committeeman classes. This is what a precinct committeeman does. This is how you win your election. Or we also have provided classes like FACL classes, Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership, how to run a campaign, how to door knock, how to do all these things. So that's what we've been doing for the last few years. And we have hundreds of people that are now running for precinct committeeman, running for delegate. And most of that two primary rule that happened this cutoff, those were a lot of our candidates that were kicked off the ballot, that were trying to engage for the first time their local office and just run for precinct committeeman. And the parties came in and said, nope, you don't have two primaries. They're like, come on. So those people now that are upset with the future of America, that want to engage for the first time, that are taking the risk to go out and apply and do it and learn all this, but they only have one primary. They just got kicked off the ballot by their own party. You can't come do this role. It's offensive. And again, it's been a big part of our campaign. Everywhere we go, this is what we talk about: getting people engaged, recruiting them, bringing them into the fold, and saying you have to. And your job as a precinct committeeman is to go knock on all the doors in your precinct and tell them who the candidates are and why it's important to vote for you and all this stuff. And that would not change, Vince. That would not change if we were to win this candidacy. It will continue to engage people, except this time I would have. Now, if you go to the GOP website for every county, it talks about their leadership. And in the bottom left, it says our leader, Jim Baird. If it said that and it said our leader, that's what they're saying, is that the leader within these parties, in these county parties, is that congressman. I would take that very seriously, and I would lead these parties. We would look at the good parties that are engaging people, that have people coming in, that are raising money and doing events, that are not pushing people out through two primary rule, kicking them off the ballot, not having any access, treating it like a little club for them and their buddies, but bringing in this average person, bringing in the average citizens. We need you to run for precinct committeemen so we don't have to appoint them. We need to know what your issues are and your representation. So we would only encourage to build this network, this large network that we've already built in the 4th Congressional District. It's also why I'm very bullish on our campaign, is because we have so many people that are running for these offices, that are supporters, that have been brought in by me and our group and people like me that are recruiting in our area.
Yeah, I see your people everywhere. I was at a fair last year and someone representing you was next to me and I had a good chance to talk with him. So you're out there.
Yeah.
Speaking of being out there, as we're wrapping up, dialing down the political side, which is important and why we're here, and getting back to just the human side. You're all over this very large district. People don't realize how big the 4th Congressional District is. And I've said this in all the interviews, it's going to be like a broken record, but when I drive to Chicago to see family, most of my drive is our district. And Greencastle's almost fairly center in the district.
Come on, south part of it.
Yeah, south central. I mean, it still goes down to
Morgan County.
South central.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, up there.
Yeah, I got you. But when you're out there, I know you're working hard, knocking on doors, talking to people, but I'm sure you're eating and visiting different locations. What are some gems that are out in the 4th Congressional District that you would recommend people visiting, whatever you like to do?
That's really hard. Actually, to tell you the truth, there's not a lot of eating. There's not a lot of meeting at these groups. As a grassroots candidate, it's work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
That's what it is. We meet with, here's a gem, Briggs Core Dynamic, which is a shooting range in Fowler, Indiana, where we just did a fundraiser, a Shoot with the Green Beret fundraiser. It's an incredible training opportunity. They do classes. They do medical training classes, shooting classes, demonstrations, prep classes, those kinds of. That's a great gem. It's right in the middle of the district. But I don't eat much when I'm out. We are full on, very little time to stop and take breaks, mostly door knocking and meeting, because we have to capitalize on where we can beat the incumbent. The incumbent has a franked mail privilege, which he's using using our taxpayer dollars to campaign and tell you why you should vote for him. We don't have that. So we have to use our volunteer infrastructure to hand out literature to all the primary voters. So that's a lot of what we do. But you did put me on the spot where I guess probably the best thing about the 4th Congressional District are so many small parks and state parks that are in the 4th District that are beautiful. Turkey Run, Shade State Park. And then you get up north into Warren County, this beautiful area. It's rural. And that's what so much of the 4th District is rural, beautiful, agricultural land that has a specific culture that the uniparty system, that the managerial class, that big government is trying to change for their own benefit, not for the benefits of the constituents or the taxpayers there, but for the benefit of the elitists, of the politically connected, of the political class that wants to implement their centralized planning into the 4th District. And it's happening, and it's very frustrating and offensive, I think, to people that hold those values so close, that rural, agricultural, conservative Christian lifestyle.
I am a big fan of parks myself, and I want to recommend, I've recommended to I think everyone so far, our restaurants in Greencastle are incredible. And it's going to be lunchtime when you're leaving here. I wish I could go out to lunch with you, but you should check out one of our restaurants here in town. But a gem here in Greencastle is the Nature Park, a little west of town. Okay. Highly recommend whenever you get a chance, it's not wet out, to check that out.
Yeah, I can't go around there kicking around it right now.
Yeah, no, you definitely don't want to. But as we're wrapping up here, I want to give every candidate an opportunity to look right at the camera and give your stump. This is going to be an unedited version of you making your final pitch, include your contact information, how people can reach you. And I'm just going to sit back, get out of the way, and let you do your thing.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I appreciate it. My name is Charles Bookwalter. I'm running for the 4th Congressional District, as you've heard here today. And my question just would be to you, do you think that you're better off today than you were 4 years ago or 8 years ago? Are the schools doing better despite getting more money and more authority? Is healthcare better despite having more regulation and being more expensive than it ever has been? Are food costs better? Transportation costs? And the answer is no. We're seeing an unraveling of America, and it has to do with both parties taking too much authority, too much control, and too much of our money in taxes, and then mismanaging it. And conservatives, their feet should be held to the fire more than anybody else, because conservatives and Republicans claim to be the party of limited government, small, transparent government, and an adherence to the 10th Amendment. But in my entire lifetime, all I've ever seen is these promises that they're the most conservative person that's going to fight for your values and fight for your culture and fight for the agricultural rural lifestyle in Indiana, and they fail us. And COVID was a perfect example of the complete failure of our Republicans to stick up for our God-given rights to life, liberty, and property. And so I'm asking you, the primary is the election. And if you want to see fundamental change, serious change, you have to support someone that's out there saying and speaking the words like, we need to defund the Department of Education. We need to defund the ATF and these agencies that they've built up around us to fix the problems that they say they're going to fix that are important to us, and then they fail. The border is a failure, despite the trillions of dollars that they get in border security, homeland security, and local law enforcement. Yet it's a failure. And there's myriad examples of that failure, despite the increase in money that they've taken from us and the increase in the responsibilities the federal government has taken. And if you want serious, significant change, then you have to support candidates like mine. So I ask for you to go out on May 7th and vote in the primary for me to represent you in the 4th Congressional District. And I appreciate your time listening to us today.
Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks
really
a lot.
Appreciate it.
Yes,
Anytime you're in town, give me a call.
Yeah.
You're watching a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall. Our program will return after this message. What does true conservative leadership look like? It looks exactly like this.
We are here in Davenport, Iowa. We drove over yesterday in some pretty difficult situations and inclement weather. But we decided that because of the snowstorm that just came into Davenport, they were gonna need some extra help here on the ground. So we came and looked for opportunities to help the Trump campaign, but also a local congressional rep here, David Posh, I think is his name. We're headed down to the fairgrounds right now to the gun show, and we're going to go stump for a local candidate that's a patriot, just like us, an America First patriot.
Well, the incumbent is a lady named Marionette Miller Meek, Priya, and she's been in Congress, she's working on her second term and her pension, which she seems to need to be more concerned about than the big issues in our country. She's silent on all the big macro issues. She deals in trinkets and handouts for the constituents. But her positions are very clearly demonstrated by this last passing of the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. $888 billion of funding, which include funding for Ukraine and all of its kickbacks and laundering of money to people in power in the United States and elsewhere. And also funding for military abortion, funding for transgender surgeries, and worst of all, extension of the FISA Act to April of 2025, which is already by the FISA court. It's been proven that they used illegally against us domestic citizens 275,000 times. But she says, well, I don't care what is in the bill as long as there's funding for the military. You don't care about all these omnibus items that are put in there. It should have never been voted for by any self-respecting Republican.
If you're tired of watching career politicians sell out our country to the highest bidder, now is the time to stand up and fight back. Join the Charles Bookwalter for Congress campaign at bookwalterforcongress.com. That's bookwalterforcongress.com.
I'm Charles Bookwalter, and I'm running for Congress in Indiana's 4th Congressional District because our out-of-control government is, well, it's out of control. The border's wide open, and inflation is crippling the American dream. I approve this message because it's time to change Washington, not America.
We now return you to a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I haven't even announced yet, and you make me think I've been elected. But, ladies and gentlemen, you have given me a welcome that is so heartwarming, it's something I will remember always. In addition, if I had no such reasons at all to be happy about the form of the greeting and the introductions and all here tonight, I could be grateful because every once in a while, being introduced, I get self-conscious when they begin to introduce me and start mentioning the pictures that I've been in. Now, I don't mean that I'm ashamed of them, but everyone who's been around Hollywood for any length of time has been in some movies that the studio didn't want them good, it wanted them Thursday. And I've had my share. But in the old times, you usually could count on the passing years making you forget those pictures. Now you just stay up late enough at night in front of the TV set and they all come back to haunt us. Sometimes I think it's like looking at a son you never knew you had. That takes a second, doesn't it? I have a friend in the business who stays up late to look at his old movies just to watch his hairline recede. But you know, I've been protesting the growth of government for a number of years. I've had a concern lest the permanent structure of government becomes so big that it would become beyond the control of Congress and beyond the will of the people. And I have believed that this is a problem that crosses party lines. I've seen an interesting development down through the years. When I first suggested the danger of government control inherent in so many federal handouts, there were people who denied vehemently that any such thing could ever take place. And yet, before too long, the same people were saying, what's wrong with government control? And in the recent days, we've heard representatives in the higher echelons of government ask us, well, are you afraid of your own government? Well, to tell you the truth, I am. And all of us should be. And I speak not in a partisan sense of an administration or individuals. I'm talking of the institution of government. Wasn't this the admonition of the Founding Fathers, that government tends to grow, to take on power, until freedom eventually is lost? The fact is, and we can't escape it, only government is capable of tyranny. Now, I realize this is a controversial subject, particularly as we approach an election year. But then if you didn't take up things that were controversial, you'd never talk at all. There was a man knocked on a door one day, and a small boy answered, and the man said, son, is your father home? And the boy said, no. He said, is your mother home? And the boy said, no. And finally he said, well, son, I'm your uncle on your father's side. And the kid said, well, I guess you can come in, but I'll tell you right now, you're on the wrong side. In 1772, the Boston Committee of Correspondence proclaimed the right to life, liberty, and property. 2 years later, in Philadelphia, the First Continental Congress declared that Americans were entitled to life, liberty, and property. In June of 1776, the Virginia Bill of Rights asserted that all men were equally free and independent, with the means of possessing and the right to possess and acquire property. And 3 weeks later came the Declaration of Independence, a bloody war, victory, and then a new nation which would be based on a Constitution and a Bill of Rights. Life, liberty, and property had become life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And 70 years would go by before England's Lord Acton would comment on the task of these men and what they had accomplished with this document. He would say they had solved two problems which had heretofore baffled the most enlightened nations. They had prodigiously increased the power of the national government and had founded it on the principle of equality without surrendering the security for freedom and property. And it's true. Our Constitution is a contract guaranteeing the most limited and equitable government in the long history of man's relation to man. Now, however, while the national power is prodigious, what has happened to security for freedom and our right to the ownership of the fruit of our toil? The French philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville 100 years ago said the end of freedom comes when the party in power learns it can perpetuate itself through taxation. Well, what does happen to freedom when the executive branch of government can use the money taken from the people in order to coerce the people? A foolish fear? Representative Glenn Andrews introduced an amendment to the poverty program on the floor of Congress. It is almost inconceivable that such an amendment would be required. It is even more inconceivable that the amendment was overwhelmingly repudiated and defeated. It was a simple amendment that would prohibit poverty funds from being used for political purposes. Make no mistake about it. The party in power has legislated into existence a $1.8 billion campaign fund for 1966. Five years ago, we reached a new frontier, and now we're face to face with a great society, and along the way, we've added $31 billion to our debt, but we've decreased our gold holdings until concern is felt for the solvency of our currency. And very shortly, the coins we jingle in our pocket will no longer have the ring of silver. But have no fear. We reached something of the height of absurdity when in a press conference recently we were told that the government would stand behind those artificial coins and was prepared to exchange them anytime for paper. We've discovered that every family with an income of less than $3,000 a year is poverty-stricken. At the same time, we learn that the cost of government prorates out to $3,300 per family. We reach an all-time high in food prices, as every housewife here knows. But the farmer who produces that food receives the lowest percentage of the market basket dollar he's ever received in history. And his debt in relation to income is at an all-time high, higher even than on the eve of the 1929 crash. 4.5 years ago, 5 years ago, there were no daily casualty lists. No wives and mothers receiving telegrams that began, "We regret to inform you." The last campaign found our opponents presenting themselves as conservatives in the sense that they would make no drastic change in our easy, prosperous, and affluent way. They would maintain the status quo. That's Latin for the mess we're in. We, on the other hand, were presented as radicals who'd bring about some cataclysmic upheaval. Well, now the wraps are off the Great Society, and a multitude of messages and legislation has made it plain we're to have the welfare state with an unprecedented federalization of American life. June 30th last, Congress raised the debt limit for the 7th time in 5 years, but our government spends $260 million a day, $10 million more each day than we were spending just a year ago. We're told that we're enjoying an unprecedented prosperity, but 42 government agencies, the government has just informed us, are spending $70 billion a year on public welfare. And serious discussion is given by men in high place in government to the idea that there is no longer any necessity to connect work with income, and that a man simply by being born should be assured of an annual income with no need to work. The ancient Hebrew book, the Talmud, tells us that for a father to fail to teach his son to earn a living is the same as teaching him to steal, for that might be the inevitable result. Our limited government with its decentralized powers has given way to planners, and they've laid an increasingly heavy hand on every facet of our lives. To quote de Tocqueville again, he warned that such a government would cover the face of society with a network of small, complicated rules, minute and uniform, and thus the will of man is not shattered, but softened and guided until the nation is reduced to a flock of timid and industrious animals, of which government is the shepherd. Well, the shepherd, the president, is fond of quoting in these days from the scriptures. His favorite seems to be 1 Isaiah, the 18th verse. Come, let us reason together. Now that has a sort of a warm and cozy sound, doesn't it? But let your eyes stray down a line or two into the next verses, the lines that are not quoted aloud. If ye refuse, ye shall be devoured with the sword. Freedom is very fragile. We've only known a few moments of it in all man's history. And most of those moments have taken place here, in this land, under this constitutional system and under our economic system of free enterprise. But freedom is also indivisible. It isn't spelled with an S. You can't elect to be partly free and partly slave. You're free or you're not free. If we ever decide we need a new Declaration of Independence, I hope we'll keep one line from the old. He has sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Today, for every 10,000 of us, it only takes 12 doctors to keep us well and healthy. It only takes 40 mechanics and oil station attendants for every 10,000 of us to keep our automobiles running. 37 telephone employees to keep the vast network of telephones running in this country. But it takes 130 federal employees for every 10,000 to administer the affairs of state. Federal employees outnumber state employees in 30 of the 50 states. I don't know about yours, but that's true of California, and in California, that isn't easy. The businessman, harassed and eaten out of our substance, the businessman spends 35% of his time filling out government forms and regulations. It has been estimated that this government paperwork costs American industry $20 billion a year, which must be added into the price tag. And it costs another $7 billion a year just to handle government's end of that paperwork and to store it, and already it requires 25 million cubic feet. Some time back, to show you how this can happen, there was a little New England town that decided to get in on the surplus food idea. Now, this is a good idea. No one can quarrel with the fact that if we can raise a surplus rather than waste it, it should be distributed to those people who have need. So this little town got in on this and got its share of free federal surplus food. And then they woke up one day and discovered that they were being flooded under a great load of paperwork demanded in connection with this handout. And they discovered finally they'd put on so many new city employees just to handle this that it was cheaper to get out of the program and buy the groceries retail at the corner market.
You're watching a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall. Our program will return after this message. What does Chip Roy think about Jim Baird's yes vote for Biden's $1.2 trillion spending bill?
Any Republican who votes for this bill should be ashamed of themselves.
Jim Baird should be ashamed, and we should be disgusted.
This budget funds full-term abortion. It funds DEI. It funds trans ideology on our youth as young as 12 years old.
But at least Baird voted to protect the border, right?
If you care about the border, you're getting nothing here.
On May 7th, vote no to big government Jim Baird.
I'm Charles Bookwalter, and I approve this message.
Why did Jim Baird suddenly flip-flop on his support for Ukraine funding? One day he's for it, the next he's not. For the record, between 2022 and 2023, Jim Baird voted on 3 separate occasions to give a total of $90 billion to the Ukrainian war machine. He even received an A rating for his unwavering support. But now Baird says he's against funding Ukraine. What changed? Charles Bookwalter. Charles Bookwalter is a true constitutional conservative who's ready to serve and vote the will of the people of the Fourth. That's what changed.
I'm Charles Bookwalter, and I approve this message.
We now return you to a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall.
Now we've declared war on poverty. Now no one again quarrels with the humanitarian aim. I don't think any one of us want to be like the fellow that heard about the war on poverty and went right out and threw a hand grenade at a beggar. But in getting the program passed, we heard a great deal about one state, West Virginia. Oh, this became a household word. This was the very center of poverty and distress and unemployment. Some of us thought that the whole war would be fought right there in West Virginia. Now the program is adopted. West Virginia gets $400,000. Texas gets $10 million. We're winning the war, though, at least on one front, on their own bureaucratic home grounds. $19,000 a year is a good salary, and it's a very high rate of pay in government salaries. As a matter of fact, there's only one employee out of 1,000 in the Department of Defense gets $19,000 a year. Only 1 out of 500 in the Department of Agriculture. But in the new poverty program, there's 1 out of 19. Gum Springs, Virginia was awarded $74,000, $54,000 for administrators' salaries, $20,000 for the poor. While one voice in government tells us that we're enjoying this great prosperity, another voice tells us that 1 out of 5 in our country is suffering from poverty and destitution. Now, if that figure's true, it shouldn't be too hard to find the people who need the help under this program. Well, in my hometown of Dixon, Illinois, a committee of 10, self-appointed, beholden to no voters, has established itself and asked the government for a $38,000 grant so they can go on a search to find out if there's any poverty there. It breaks down to $10,200 for the chairman and $7,200 each for 2 assistants, and the balance will go for secretaries, mailing, office expense, and travel. In another area, more than 2,000 college graduates have been hired as a part of the program to study the culture of poverty. Now, no one disagrees with the youth portion of that program. The idea that we should salvage, if possible, those young people who, for whatever reason, have failed to fit themselves for the responsibilities of adult life. But we take over a hotel and we install there young ladies who have been lifted from destitute families, and now they're to be trained so they'll be self-reliant and can go out on their own and make a living. But while they're being retrained, they're given maid service so they won't have to make their own beds. And the program prorates out to $7,000 a year for each young lady we're going to help. There are a lot of families in this country raising fine, productive citizens on less than $7,000 a year. I can think of no higher, more noble purpose than to take young men and to make sure that they get an equal chance in the start in life. But we have such a program now, and we put the young men in camps for retraining, and we pay them a higher rate of pay than we give the young man who puts on a uniform and goes out to defend his country. I am sure that all of us are agreed, every responsible citizen is agreed, that we should provide shelter for those people who, through no fault of their own, lack adequate housing. And for some time, the government has provided public housing. But now those who administer the program have expressed concern after almost 3 decades of it. Concern because an entire generation has grown up, raising children. And a second and a third generation now are growing up taking it for granted that this is an acceptable way of life. And there is no incentive for them to improve themselves, because to get a raise might destroy their eligibility for continuing to live on a subsidy in the public housing. And yet, never does government accept that it might be responsible with some of its programs for this trend or this tendency. No. Now we're going to have a program subsidizing rents. And under the technicalities of the program, people with incomes up to $11,000 or $12,000 a year will be eligible to live in a house or apartment or a neighborhood beyond their means with their thrifty new neighbors, taxed to help pay the differential in their rent. A variety of programs have diluted private property rights so that public interest is anything the planners decide it should be. For generations, we've had traditional laws of eminent domain. We have recognized the occasional need of government to take a citizen's property when there is a clear and present need for that particular piece of property in the public interest. But the citizen had his day in court, first to establish that the government paid a fair price, and second, that the government should be forced to prove that there was a clear and present need. Now, urban renewal grants the government the right to force the sale of private property for resale by government to other private citizens who can then use that property to make profit. And we have averaged selling urban renewal properties to private citizens for 30% of the investment that we, the taxpayers, have in that property. Again, I say the purpose is noble. The idea of providing decent homes for every American and eliminating slums. But 1 million people have been displaced with a bulldozer and have wound up in new slums paying a higher rent. The law says the displaced must be offered standard housing at rents they can afford in convenient locations. But if standard housing at rents they could afford in convenient locations had been available, they wouldn't have needed an urban renewal program. They'd have moved there on their own. Robert Weaver, the Federal Housing Commissioner, has said in the beginning, he has made this statement public, the government gave the use of the land to the people to speed its development. Now, I didn't remember history that way. I thought we were here and on the land and we created the government. But he says, but he has announced now, it is the policy of the government to seek to reclaim complete control of the use of the land. Planes equipped with surveying instruments fly over American farms. They survey from the air accurately to see whether the farmer has violated his planting allotment. And if he has, he's guilty as charged. No day in court. And he's fined, and if he can't pay the fine, the regulations prescribe the government can seize his farm and sell it at auction to enforce the payment of that fine. For 30 years, we've had a farm program. We've spent billions to make the farmer more prosperous and to remove unneeded surplus land from farm production, to reduce the surplus. And during that same period, the national income has tripled, but the farmer's income is smaller than it was 30 years ago. And we've increased the number of acres in cultivation by 50 million. Every dollar that we spent on price stabilization in 1948, we are today spending $25. We've reduced the number of farmers by half, and the government says another 2.5 million farmers are unneeded and must be retrained and moved to city jobs. Meanwhile, at the same time, the Appalachian program provides millions of dollars to reclaim marginal land so that the unemployed can be made farmers in that area and add to the present farm surplus. And an ominous question remains unanswered. Who will decide which citizens must leave the land? And how will the decision be made? How also will we explain that the same government that says that we need only 1 million large commercial farms now, that there is no need for the small family farmer, is still the government that tells us with another voice that no farm of over 160 acres can receive water from federal irrigation projects? Somehow one suspects that government, in all of its involvement in the farm program, will turn out to be something less than a jolly green giant. Meanwhile, the network of rules grows more minute and more uniform, as de Tocqueville warned. Down on the Mason-Dixon line, on a highway that is used by northerners taking vacations in the south, there's an oil station. Very enterprising fellow running it. A little triangle of ground, you know, between the sidewalk and the driveway that so often is covered with gravel or paved over. He planted a few cotton bushes there. Now when a tourist stops in from the north, he picks a cotton boll off the bush right there in front of them and hands it to them as a souvenir of their trip to the south. He's just been fined by the federal government for planting cotton without an allotment. The post office, just recently the post office was exposed as having for the last couple of years taken mail, letters addressed to citizens from the mail and turning them over to the Internal Revenue Service if those citizens were behind or delinquent in the paying of their income tax. And now we learn that Washington is going to subsidize art and literature. The plan calls for 2 czars with millions of dollars, which they will apportion on the basis of what they consider is meaningful in art and literature. Well, now, if they follow the pattern of some of the government-sponsored scientific research programs, there is reason for concern. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I sometimes have a suspicion that the government is subsidizing just plain intellectual curiosity when I see thousands of dollars spent on research in philology and faunal affinities of fossil bryozoa in the Middle Ordovician through Silurian. Now, the only thing I understand in that is that phrase, in the middle. There I know who they're talking about. But nothing is too small for the government to overlook. The government in Washington is now concerned with our ability to enjoy ourselves in the great outdoors, recreational facilities. They've just issued a 134-page booklet on the subject. It's full of profundities. I wonder how we managed to get along without it up till now. For example, if you lay out a campsite You should provide drinking fountains at such a height that the drinking level is convenient for the persons using the fountain. But wait till you get to the exciting chapter on wildlife. Insects crawling into the ears of outdoorsmen sometimes create painful conditions. I got news for them. It's no fun when it happens indoors.
You're watching a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall. Our program will return after this message.
Hello, my name's Charles Bookwalter, and I'm running in the 4th Congressional District to represent you. Jim Baird claims that he wants to cut wasteful federal spending, the same claims he made in 2018. Well, he's had 6 years to do that, so let's check out the record. My name's Charles Bookwalter, and I need your vote on May 7th in the primary. Please check out bookwalterforcongress.com. Thank you.
We now return you to a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall.
Wait a minute. That isn't all they have to say about wildlife. If your recreational area has a bathhouse intended for the use of both men and women, it should be divided into 2 parts by a tight partition. Now you know we'd have never thought of that one by ourselves. Honestly, though, I know that they only mean to be helpful. I know that it's really human nature and they're motivated by the most humanitarian of idealism. It's just natural for them to see the problems and see the immediate problem and to suggest, oh, if we had a little more money, a little more power, what we could do for the people. Now, in an atmosphere of emergency and excessive zeal for our welfare, the federal government proposes to invade an area, the traditional province of the local community and state, the finest public school system in all the world, with no real determination yet that the federal government is the best manager of our educational affairs. A suspicion prevails that they're not so much interested in speeding progress as they are in asserting authority in every conceivable aspect of the educational system. An educational system that has worked very well and has been responsive to parental opinion. But Washington insists that it only wants to help solve the financial problems attendant on our rapid growth. Well, problems there are, particularly because the federal government in recent years has dried up so many sources of local revenue by usurping those sources for its own tax policies. But that same government has figures that reveal that we at the local level in the last decade have increased school revenue by 156%. We have built in 10 years $30 billion worth of classrooms. We have reduced the ratio of pupil to teacher and pupil to classroom. And we've increased the average teacher's salary by 65%. And yet every suggestion that we make for earmarking tax money and allowing it to remain at the local level without running it through those puzzle palaces on the Potomac first is met with great resistance. Already there are 135 separate federal agencies and offices doling out money at the college level. Some time ago, a group of distinguished college presidents, alarmed at the extent to which academic freedom has been compromised by these vast money grants, went to Washington, and they had a proposal they'd worked out. a proposal for allowing the individual citizen to compute his income tax and then deduct a specified amount and contribute it to the college of his choice instead of paying it in income tax. And the government would be allowed to determine the proper amount that would solve the problem and yet not disrupt the government's own economy or need for revenue. And thus they would get around the question of church and state, the separation of same, if an individual citizen chose to contribute his money to a church-supported school. Over and over again in Washington, they kept asking, but why won't this system work? And finally a Freudian slip occurred. Francis Keppel, United States Director of Education, blurted out, "You don't understand, under the plan you propose, we couldn't achieve our social objectives." Social objectives. And now we uncover a memorandum, thanks to the press actually, a memorandum in the Community Relations Service of the Poverty Program. Has nothing really to do with education, but the memorandum is very disturbing in this sentence. We should conduct a systematic effort to contact all publishers and school boards to encourage their publication and adoption of textbooks conforming to established standards. Well, if the government is going to build the schools and buy the books, issue scholarships, make judgments, and exert pressure, what if one day that pressure is of a political nature not to our liking? Education is the bulwark of freedom, but you remove it too far from the community and the parents' control, and education becomes the tool of tyranny. Already here and there in our land, there are too many students that are studying from textbooks that devote a chapter to public welfare and not one line to Patrick Henry. Sometimes when you look at the problem, you think that government's like a baby. It's an alimentary canal with an appetite at one end and no sense of responsibility at the other. We're taxed in our food and our drink and our shelter, with the government taking a higher percentage from the productive free economy than any government has ever done in history without ruin. So-called tax reform, when it is suggested, winds up as the old shell game. They just rearrange it, shift it around, and apply it someplace else, as we discovered with the so-called tax cut we thought we had. Our tax policy today is based on the idea that we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. Well, we'd better take another look. We're robbing Paul to pay Paul, and we're all named Paul. Peter went bankrupt a long time ago. Inflation, planned and deliberate over the last 3 decades, has reduced the value of our dollar to 35.5 cents. Well, how did this come about? Well, mainly because we have perverted our Constitution. Perverted it with regard to a welfare clause that doesn't exist, perverted it with regard to the misuse of the taxation system, perverted it with regard to the interpretation of the clauses on interstate commerce. And we've done it under such high-sounding phrases as the greatest good for the greatest number, or one man, one vote, forgetting that majority rule becomes mob rule unless there is a set of ground rules protecting the individual. One's right to life. One's right to life, to liberty, to the freedom of worship, to speak, to assemble, in short, our God-given unalienable rights, may not be submitted to a vote. The very purpose of the Bill of Rights was to forever put them beyond reach of majority rule. 100 years ago, the problem of the nation was a nation half slave and half free, and whether such a nation could survive. And today it's a world half slave and half free, and whether mankind himself can survive. We call out to the guard in the night and ask, does all go well? And echoing back from the shores of the Potomac comes the word, there's nothing to fear. Nothing to fear but an evil enemy who since World War II has increased the enslavement of from 8% of the world's population to near 40%. Every lesson of history tells us that as a nation has grown in culture and refinement and advanced, It has softened, and when confronted by the barbarian, the less cultured, the barbarians have triumphed. You and I have come to our moment of truth. Does man exist only by permission of and for the sake of the state, the group, marching toward eternity in a super ant-heap, or does he control his own destiny? This is a question that must be answered by all of us, regardless of party. To those who are Democrats, ask yourselves if the leadership of your party still follows the precepts of Jefferson, Jackson, and Cleveland. Take the platform of 1932 on which Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected, with its demand for a 25% reduction in the cost of the federal government, for restoration of constitutional limits on the power of that government, for a return to the states and the local communities and the individuals of the rights that had been taken from them. Ask which party would be most at home today with those promises. I know that the bond of party loyalty is very strong. I was a Democrat most of my life. I know it is hard to make a change from party loyalty and the party of your lifelong choice without a feeling that you're being treasonable or unfair. I say to you, have no feeling of disloyalty if you have decided you no longer can follow the leadership of that party tonight, because the leadership of that party has long since abandoned you. And now to those of us of another party, to those who are Republicans. Today, the Republican Party is the vehicle we must use as the party of opposition. Opposition to the misguided leadership at home and opposition to all the evil abroad that threatens the dignity and freedom of man in every land. And it's an awesome responsibility. And you and I, who are Republicans, cannot meet it with a splintered party. For too long, we have been Republicans complete with descriptive adjectives and hyphens before the word Republican. Moderate Republicans, liberal Republicans, conservative Republicans, whatever label we chose. The truth is we've been sucker Republicans. Those adjectives and those hyphens were given to us by our opponents, and the time has come to bundle them up and give them back. If you have to hang on to the hyphen, just be a good or a Republican. We can cringe in the shadow of a philosophy we detest but fear to challenge, or we can rise from a defeat and begin the second round of our struggle to restore the Republic. And now there are those among us, there are Republicans today who understandably, so hungry to get back to the position that we once held, to reestablish some equality in this two-party system, restore the imbalance we now have, who have suggested, even somewhat cynically, that maybe we should start talking to voter blocs and making promises, that perhaps we should even reshape our party in the image of the victorious party on the basis that perhaps an imitation might get more votes than we've been attracting. Well, I'd like to suggest there is a bloc we can appeal to. It's a voter bloc of millions and millions of people. It crosses party lines, ethnic lines, religious and racial lines, economic lines. It's made up of millions of unsung heroes, people who get up in the morning, send their kids to school and go to work. They contribute to their church and their charity and their community. They believe that they were created in God's image and that God is the author of their rights and freedom. And they're disturbed because their children can no longer ask God's blessing in a schoolroom. I say to you, that block of voters can be ours. Not if we come to them with any imitation or ersatz program, but only if we're willing to stand on principle. Yes, let's be willing to tell them that we too want to solve and will solve, as to the best of our ability, the problems of poverty and hunger and health and old age and unemployment. But we believe we can do that without resulting to undue compulsion and fiscal irresponsibility. That we believe we can put a floor beneath which no American will be asked to live in degradation, but at the same time we will not erect a ceiling above which no citizen can fly without being penalized for his initiative and his effort. And let us tell them that hard though the problems may be that face us on the world scene, we will not buy our protection from the threat of the bomb by trading away the freedom of people in other lands not ours to give. And let's tell them that if their sons are going to be asked to fight and die for their country, at the same time they'll be allowed to win. To all Republicans today entrusted with this responsibility, because it is ours, I say look deep in your own hearts and ask yourselves if you possibly can have any difference with any other Republican that is more important than this challenge that faces us tonight. If you have, if you're unwilling to meet this challenge, then you'd better start preparing, deciding what you'll tell your children it was that you found more important than freedom. They'll want to know. Thank you.
You're watching a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall. Our program will return after this message. Why did Jim Baird suddenly flip-flop on his support for Ukraine funding? One day he's for it, the next he's not. For the record, between 2022 and 2023, Jim Baird voted on 3 separate occasions to give a total of $90 billion to the Ukrainian war machine. He even received an A rating for his unwavering support. But now Baird says he's against funding Ukraine. What changed? Charles Bookwalter. Charles Bookwalter is a true constitutional conservative who's ready to serve and vote the will of the people of the Fourth. That's what changed.
I'm Charles Bookwalter, and I approve this message.
What does Chip Roy think about Jim Baird's yes vote for Biden's $1.2 trillion spending bill?
Any Republican who votes for this bill should be ashamed of themselves.
Jim Baird should be ashamed, and we should be disgusted.
This budget funds full-term abortion. It funds DEI. It funds trans ideology on our youth as young as 12 years old.
But at least Baird voted to protect the border, right?
If you care about the border, you're getting nothing here.
On May 7th, vote no to Big Government Jim Baird.
I'm Charles Bookwalter, and I approve this message.
We now return you to a special presentation of the Charles Bookwalter Digital Town Hall.